Hey, if you're sick, put down that glass of milk because if you drink it, you're going to be blowing your nose for the next 3 or 4 hours. I wanted to do this video because I really want to dive in to the correlation between dairy consumption and mucus production in the body. You see, everywhere out there we hear that if we consume dairy when we're sick, we're going to have an excess volume of phlegm and mucus. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of conflicting science on both sides of the equation. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of dairy to begin with. Those of you that know me, those of you that watch my videos, know that I have 3 or 4 good reasons not to consume dairy. But I want to really dive into this conflicting science because it's so interesting. Now, before I really go into detail, you have to understand a little bit of the genetic background of milk and the caseinate protein that it contains. See, back in 2010, there was a study that basically claimed that if you live in specific regions, you can have a different negative impact or positive impact from dairy. And what it comes down to is the fact that there are 2 genetic varieties of beta-caseinate proteins in dairy. Now, caseinate protein can make up about 80% of the overall protein in dairy. So it's pretty impactful when it comes down to how negative it can be or how positive it can be. So there's 2 different types of genetic variations. There's A1 and A2. See, A2 is the original beta-caseinate. It's the one that's been in dairy for this entire time. But then there's a different one called A1. This A1 caseinate has only been in dairy for the last, say, 5 to 10,000 years, and it really came to be through a genetic mutation that happened over in Europe. Well, what happened is that A2 became the more prevalent form of caseinate protein. And when you consume copious amounts of A2, you have a production of something called BCM7 in your body. That BCM7 is something that's called a bioactive peptide. Well, what was ultimately found was when you had an increase in that BCM7 that was directly stemmed from that A2 caseinate protein, there was a direct correlation with that and excess mucus within the digestive system. So it was simply hypothesized that if you had any kind of inflammation going on in your respiratory tract, maybe from a cold or a flu, that dairy would cause that BCM7 reaction that would cause excess phlegm and mucus within the respiratory tract as well. Now that's a pretty solid theory. It seems like it would make a lot of sense. So there's been more studies that actually dive into that specific topic surrounding phlegm. Now, prior to that 2010 study, there was actually a 2004 study that took 22 asthmatic children, 22 children that clearly had an inflammatory issue with their respiratory system. Those 22 children cut out dairy and they cut out eggs out of their diet for a length of time. After a certain number of weeks, those children exhibited reduced levels of inflammation within their respiratory tract, also had a lot easier of a time breathing, and had less atopic episodes. So right there, it was pretty clear that we're looking overall that dairy can cause excess phlegm. But then we start looking at some more studies. Some of the more recent studies are showing that participants that are sick, that are consuming both a placebo dairy that really is soy milk or almond milk, and those that are consuming regular dairy don't see any difference in phlegm production depending on which one they're drinking. You see, both sets of test subjects had equal amounts of congestion and excess phlegm, which leads us to believe that it could actually just be a hydration issue more than anything. Sometimes more hydration when you're sick might lead to a thinner viscosity mucus, which makes it seem like you have more. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of studies at you, but the next one actually took another 60 participants, and they reported that there was an increase in congestion, but when they actually measured mucus volume, there was absolutely no change when there was dairy consumption involved. So at the end of the day, it's still somewhat inconclusive, and it probably comes down to a little bit of your genetic makeup and how sensitive you are to those caseinate proteins that cause that BCM7 biopeptide reaction within your body. At the end of the day, there's a number of other reasons to avoid dairy. But I think for now, we probably need to sit down the topic that dairy causes excess mucus and let the science continue to come through over the next couple of years. As always, keep it locked in here on my channels for more ways to become the best possible version of yourself through good health as a platform. I'll see you in the next one.